listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Michael, how we doing? How was the trip to Ann Arbor? The Wolverines going to go ahead and win the Big Ten again this year?
Well, I think it's a good team. One thing I've learned in my career is teams that kind of have camaraderie and get along, that's the start, right? That doesn't mean you're going to win everything, but you could just sense in that building that there was unique camaraderie, that I think everybody was buying into the program. There was nobody outside, and you could feel it. I mean, you could feel the energy. And I think the success they've had over the last 2 years hasn't kind of gotten to them. I think they want to obviously continue to go forward. The TCU loss stings. I was impressed. I really was, Femi. I mean, I think they're ready to go. They're all bought in.
Yeah, well, they're co-favorites to win the Big Ten and one of the favorites to win the national title. We'll see if they can live up to the expectations. Just on the doorstep of doing it a season ago, but TCU beat them in the Fiesta Bowl. We'll get into Hard Knocks. I don't know, did you see the Manziel documentary? I have notes from that. It's a doozy.
I did not.
It's a doozy. It's a fun one. But we'll get into all that.
I think from what I've read, though, a lot of it is and I said this from the beginning. I mean, you got to have a plan for the player when you get him in the building.
Yeah.
And you let him do a Snickers commercial the minute he gets in the building. That's really on you. That's not on anybody else. You got to have a way to manage the players. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I want to get into the GM side of things. When we talk about it, I want to just ask you just a little bit later on in the podcast. We'll get into that stuff. But we also have blue chips, red chips, the defensive tackles. We have a fresh crop of DTs to go over. Who has the belt? Aaron Donald's had it for forever. Does he have it this year? We'll talk about that coming up in a little bit later. But we have to start with what's going on in our nation's capital, the Washington Commanders. We were celebrating about a few weeks ago, Michael. It's a new day. Josh Harris, new ownership. And now we're going right back into the mud because head coach Ron Rivera, he was asked about how kind of players have been getting used to Eric Bieniemy and then was really kind of critical of his coaching style and was just saying that, hey, guys are really struggling with it. Here's the clip that Rivera had from earlier this week when he was speaking to the Washington Commanders media.
I mean, it's a whole different approach. You get a different kind of player from the players back in the past, especially in light of how things are coming out of college football. So a lot of these young guys, they do struggle with certain things. And a lot of you also got to take for where they've been. I mean, guys coming from certain programs are used to it. Guys coming from other programs aren't as much. So, us as a coach, I kind of have to assimilate and get a feel for everybody. Eric has an approach, and it's the way he does things, and he's not going to change, and because he believes in it.
What did you make of those comments when you heard them?
If I were Josh Harris, I would say, what is our standard of performance? I mean, I think the real critical component here is, what is your standard of performance, Ron? When you bring the players in, they all come from different programs, but here's our program. Here's what we expect of you. It's not Eric Bieniemy's program. It's not Jack Del Rio's program. It's the Washington program. I'm making $10 million a year. Here's my program. Here's what we expect. Here's the standard of performance that you have to adhere to. That's why they call you the head coach. That's why you're in charge. That's why you're making all that coin, right? So you bring the players in, and this is what we want. We expect this. And then that coaching staff adheres to what you want. He was very clear that everybody's an independent contractor, and he's kind of sorting it through. How is that leadership? That's an absence of leadership. That's not leadership. At some point, you run the program. At some point, the program does what you believe in. The number one thing, why do teams struggle? Why do organizations struggle? Why do businesses fall apart? Because they don't know what they are. They have no idea. They're a random element. Why does Chick-fil-A do well? Because they know who they are, right? Mm-hmm. Why does certain they just know it? In-N-Out Burger, they know who they are. This is what we do. What are the Washington team? What's Ron Rivera? Well, this, come on, man. What's your standard performance?
Yeah, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I have comments on this, but I want to get to the Eric Bieniemy soundbite because obviously when Rivera had that to say, a lot of people ran with it and it became a story in itself. But Eric Bieniemy was asked about his coaching style. Here's what he told the Washington media.
When I'm getting on them, ain't nothing personal. What's personal is that I want us to win. I expect that particular player to be great at all times. I expect the effort to be a standard that's accepted by all of us. So when you're not reaching that, it's my job to address it. So sometimes they may like the highlights and the praise, but sometimes they may not like it. And I'm perfectly fine with that because that's my job. Because if I ain't doing my job, my ass get fired. So it's my job and my responsibility to make sure that I'm getting our guys to do what I expect them to do.
I mean, that seems pretty reasonable to me, at least.
He used the term that Rivera didn't even use, the standard. I mean, he used it. Look, I don't know if Bieniemy's a good coach or not. I know he interviewed for 8 head coaching jobs. He didn't get one. The media thinks he's been overlooked. I don't know. I wasn't a part of those 8 interviews. I know when you have 8 interviews, that's a lot, and you can't flip it to get a head coaching job. I don't know what happened, but I respect what he just said there. And what he's trying to do is have a standard. But the problem he has is the standard can't come from him. The standard has to come from the head coach. And he can't be the bad guy all the time, right? He can't be the bad guy. The head coach is going to have to be the bad guy. The head coach is in charge of making sure the players rise to the standard. And then when they don't, he gets on the coach. And then the coach, it all works downhill. But what you have here is a back-end loaded system where you have the position, the coordinator, who's trying to generate the standard where the head coach isn't even supporting them. Like when you're a leader, you stand in front of people. If the players are coming to you to complain about how Bieniemy is coaching, right? Why would you go to the media for that? You're watching Bieniemy coach every day. Wouldn't you say, Eric, that's not who we are. That's not how we coach. Bill Walsh would tell every coach, every scout what he wanted, what he expected, what he needed. Belichick, same thing. Here's who we are. Here's what we do. You never see guys in New England. You never see them acting outside. Rivera goes ahead and says, well, Jack Del Rio does what he wants. Wait a minute. If I'm Josh Harris, did I name Jack Del Rio the head coach? Did I name Eric? Like, you're the guy I'm supposed to be hiring. What am I paying you for?
It's a very fair question. And to me, when I saw those comments from Rivera, and now since then, Rivera put out a quote yesterday from his press conference saying that I basically told him I put my foot in my mouth. I think what I said wasn't as clear as it needed to be. As I've said many times since I've hired Eric, I love the overall message that he gave to the team his first day. And that was basically, we've got to learn to be comfortable when we're uncomfortable. To me, it almost felt like Rivera, who I'm sure he feels the pressure out there in the nation's capital because there's a new ownership group in there. This owner did not hire him. And there's an expectation to either show improvement or be shown the door. To me, it felt like Rivera was sort of kind of trying to craft a narrative that, like, if things didn't work out, it's, well, I mean, offensively, we had some tough coaching and the players didn't take to that coaching. That's what it looked like to me, that he was almost setting up this, if they don't have success, he has a fall guy.
Right. I mean, and it also looks like I didn't really want to hire Bieniemy. They made me hire him.
Also,
that's not what I really wanted to do, which is bullshit, right? So, like, but really what it is, even his apology doubles down on the fact he has no program. Like, he has no program. He has no standard of excellence. He has nothing that, I mean, Eric Bieniemy's trying to have it for the offense. I don't know if Del Rio, he said, well, Del Rio's been a head coach before, like, what are you doing? Like, what do you do? Like, your job is to determine the program. Your job is to focus on the details. Your job is to fix the problems, not create the problems, right? If you're not coaching offense, you're not coaching defense, you're the head coach. You're in charge of the whole operation. And you have a standard that everybody has to adhere to, whether the assistant's your best friend or whether the star quarterback, whatever it is. Nothing gets in the way of that. You've got to hold everybody accountable. And if the players are coming to you to complain about the coach, like, what are we doing? What is that? Like, you've watched every practice. Right? If you thought you had a problem with Bieniemy, call him in your office and say, hey, Eric, I think you got it. Let me handle that. I'll cover that. I'll demand more from them. You go back to just working on making sure they got it. However, there's been no planning. you could just see there's an absence of leadership and there's an absence of organization, which is shocking, really, when you look at their team and their performance on the field. There's an absence of leadership and there's an absence of detailed coaching. Wonder why they are 8-8 all the time, or they haven't had wonder why he's only had 3 winning records in all the time he's been there. Now, everybody loves him. He's a great guy. Everybody always apology. Well, Rivera was trying to talk to his team through the media. No, he wasn't. He revealed to everybody in the world he has no plan. He has no standard.
Yeah, and we've talked about this for a number of years here, talking about how Rivera, despite getting love from the media, he doesn't have the results to back it. I mean, like you mentioned, 3 winning seasons. Did you know I was looking it up, Michael, the other day? I was like, gosh, because I know Rivera only has 3 winning seasons. Who's that comparable to? Because Rivera's been a coach in the NFL for about 12 years. In fact, it's comparable to your old buddy, the Clapper, Jason Garrett, who we all kill. And I kill him too, because as a Cowboys fan, he frustrated the hell out of me. But Jason Garrett only has 3 winning seasons. He's on the NBC set. Rivera has 3 winning seasons. It's just
he talks like he sounds like he's won 5 Super Bowls. You can't tell him anything. You can't tell him a thing. There's no curiosity. Rivera is the same way. You couldn't tell Rivera.
Yeah.
You couldn't tell Rivera that, maybe you don't have a program here. I'm sitting here watching. If I'm Josh Harris, I'm saying, you just fired yourself, Ron. You just told me very clearly there's not a program here.
That's what I would be thinking if I was Josh Harris as well. And to Eric Bieniemy's defense, we saw Tyreek Hill, who played under Eric Bieniemy when he was in Kansas City. He tweeted that, man, there is no other coach that has your back like EB. Take that coach and get better. We've all been through. It's tough, but I promise you it will make you better. That's Tyreek Hill, who now is over with the Miami Dolphins. But he went out there and defended his guy, I guess, because, it sounds like, because we've heard Mahomes defend Eric Bieniemy and say that he should be a head coach and all that stuff. I don't know what's going on, like you said, in those interviews to why he hasn't become a head coach, but maybe this is a situation to where if things go off the rails, he ends up stepping in as the interim for the Washington Commanders. Who knows if that's what's going to happen here, but, at least it's interesting to see Tyreek Hill go ahead and defend him.
Well, everybody's defending him. The media defends Bieniemy. The media doesn't understand why he hasn't gotten a job, but the media's not in those interviews. They're not in those interviews, right? Nobody knows. Somebody, and a lot of his friends didn't hire him. People that have been in Kansas City didn't hire him.
That is true. We'll see. It's not a good brew out there with the Washington Commanders. You don't like to see this sort of friction between the coaching staff. On the other side, let's talk Hard Knock Jets here on the GM Shuffle. Also get to Blue Chips, Red Chips.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Hard Knocks has debuted, Michael, the New York Jets under the microscope of HBO, and episode 1, I caught it the other night. I thought it was interesting, Michael. Do you have Hard Knocks on the schedule? Is that going to be on the viewing list for you over there?
I will get to it. Yeah, I will get to it. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I will certainly get to it. I can't wait. I want to watch Robert Saleh. I want to see how he's doing it. All he talks about all the time is how they're just. It's like, just put them in the conference championship game right now. Just put them there.
Pencil them in. Jets versus insert other 18. They might play the Chiefs. They might play the Bills. They might play the Bengals, the Ravens. Who knows?
We belong. We belong.
So I'll give my thoughts on this. I don't want.
Go ahead.
There's spoilers or whatever. It's been out for a couple days. People go ahead and watch it if you want. But from the Saleh point, he has this shit-eating grin on his face the whole time, man. They are extremely excited, and they should be, for Aaron Rodgers now being there after what they had a season ago. And the show starts with him giving this monologue to the team, and he's giving this analogy about the eagle and the crow, and about how they're trying to be the eagle, and the eagle can fly to elevations that the crow can't get to. The crow is all the outside noise and all that stuff. And he's kind of bring it to the whole, hey, the outside noise and these other teams, those are the crows. We got to be the eagle and elevate past all of them and soar above the competition and win the Super Bowl. But that whole coaching staff, you can kind of see they're jacked up, man. And the episode, I'll give them a pass just because it was the first episode, and usually the first episode for Hard Knocks is kind of setting the context of what the team is like, the storylines heading into camp, and just pretty much laying the groundwork for a novice who doesn't follow the NFL as closely as we do. But, in addition to it being Robert Saleh being very excited for Rodgers, it was also a Rodgers infomercial. Like that thing, man. I think we saw in the 1 hour. I want to say Rodgers was on camera for like 48 minutes or so. Like, it's a Rodgers
What you expect?
commercial.
I mean, he's the star attraction, right?
He is.
I mean, he's got to be. That's why they got it. I mean, he's there, and the I mean, look, I've just has there ever been one of these situations where it all goes to plan? I mean, I read the New York Post this morning, and the headline in the Post was, they got their asses kicked by the Panthers' defensive front. That the Jets' offensive line didn't look so good. Now, Dwayne Brown's still on PUP. I don't know where Becton is. He played 7 snaps in the game and took himself out. I mean, but this is the concern. For all the talk about Rodgers, if you don't block him, look, what's Rodgers' kryptonite? The 2 home losses that he had in the playoffs in Green Bay, right? And it's every quarterback's kryptonite. But go back to it. Tampa Bay, second half, a lot of pressure from that defensive front against Green Bay's offensive line. Then San Francisco goes into Lambeau Field. A lot of pressure from that front, So if they don't fix the line, I don't really care about anything else. I mean, we know this. The Eagles' success gets kind of masked around the quarterback, which is great. The system that the quarterback plays in, and of course the receivers. But if it wasn't for this offensive line, the Eagles wouldn't, nor would Jalen Hurts, nor anything would be as successful.
Yeah, it's almost like as a football community, we always learn the wrong lessons from the teams that are successful. Like we sat here a year ago doing the blue chips, red chips, and when we got to the defensive line, the offensive line portion, it's like, okay, we got a lot of Eagles on this list. Like, this is a really good team, both sides of the ball in the trenches where it matters the most. And that's why we were so bullish on Philadelphia to be really good in the NFC last year. And then, like, now it's like, oh, like, well, Hurts and this and that. And like, I love Jalen Hurts. Like, seems like he's a great dude. I hate the fact that he plays for the Eagles because I actually want to like him a lot. But, like, we get kind of caught up in, like, all the glitz and the glamour of it, and then we forget, like, what's actually the meat and the potatoes. It's like, hey, it's right. O-line, it's D-line.
Right. I mean, you got Brian Burns, you got Derek Brown, you got guys you got to block down there in Carolina. Like every week, if you're in the Jets, I mean, the Patriot front's going to be tough to block. Miami's front's tough to block. We got guys on our blue chip red list from Miami. We're going to have another one today. So, like, New England's got some really good rushers that they can rush from the edge. So you're going to have to block those guys. Buffalo. They got Von Miller, who wasn't on our list, but he certainly has been on lists before. We'll see what they can do. So, to me, this is what it's going to come down to. When you sit there and you got to protect, I don't give a shit how good your quarterback is. If he's getting hit too much, it ain't going to work.
Yeah, and in my opinion, it's a downgrade that Rodgers is going from an offensive line perspective. Green Bay's O-line, when healthy, is better than this New York Jet O-line. So they're going to have to pick up the pieces somewhere and figure this thing out for the Jets. But all this concern about the O-line, Michael, has not deterred the betting public from backing JETS, Jets. Because since Hard Knocks premiered on Tuesday night, the Jets have received the most tickets to win the Super Bowl over at our show sponsor, DraftKings. So the Jets are around that 16-1 price to win the Super Bowl. It's the people love to fall in love with these teams that are featured on Hard Knocks.
They fall for stories.
Yeah.
I mean, all you got to realize is they fell for the Warren Commission. They fell for the single bullet theory. I mean, America just can't wait to fall for it, right? They can't wait. I mean, and you got people that, like, I've been listening to this podcast called The Enduring Project. It's like literally they take all of Garrison's notes, and the guy just basically goes through it all facts. It's all facts. And, and you sit there and listen to this and you're like, okay, like you really think Lee was up there on the 6th floor act alone, but they sold us the story and people buy it. That's why the betting companies, they're selling the story. DraftKings will take it. They have no problem. Nobody's being analytical. Nobody's looking at it from a different point of view to say, okay, maybe there is an issue here. They're just gullible. People fall for things.
Yep, they're the most bet team in terms of the handle to win the Super Bowl, and then, like I said, they have received the most tickets to win the Super Bowl since Tuesday night.
I mean, would you just, do you think that you got a bad offensive line? I got questions about their head coach. I'm not saying they're not going to make the playoffs. I'm not saying they're not going to be better. Nobody's mentioned, other than me, no one's mentioned that they only forced 2 turnovers in the last 9 games of the season with their defense. Like, nobody even mentions that at all. Like, they haven't created turnovers. Yeah. For a defense that's supposed to be so great, when are they going to create turnovers? We'll see if they do. And it's funny. people say, well, preseason doesn't matter. Preseason's no big deal. Okay. Well, Buffalo, was 31st in the league last year in turnovers in preseason. What happened in the opening game? They turned the ball over. Now they beat the Rams, but they did exactly what they did in the preseason. They turned it over, right? People say the preseason doesn't matter. Okay. Well, when Vic Fangio was the head coach of the Denver Broncos, they had 8 penalties all preseason. When Hackett took over, they had 23. Now you decide, right? They had 8 in 3 games with Fangio. They had 23 with Hackett. You figure it out.
And meanwhile, in week 2, you have the fans counting down the play clock because to help the team out from avoiding a delay of game out there in Denver. But I do think it's interesting. And like you, I think the Jets, they'll be a good team in my opinion. We're not trying to dump on the Jets. I know Jets fans might listen to this and be like, everyone's trying to dump on us just because we're getting a lot of glamour with the Rodgers acquisition. This is not that. This is just a kind of a temper expectations a little bit. Right. I think this is what we're saying. Well, is temper them a little bit.
You got to figure out, this is the time of the year where you got to sit there and say, okay, this is our concerns as a football team. The job of a head coach, this is why I think what Rivera said the other day was so bad. His job is to figure out how he can best play the game to win games. That's what he does in preseason. Salah's not going to do that. He's going to let Hackett run his stuff. He's going to let the defense coordinator. At some point, somebody's got to bring it all together and say, okay, this is the way we have to play to win this year. Right? Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able to do this, and that, and we're going to, because of our limitations in personnel, we have to do this. That's strategy. That's what you have to do. Meanwhile, the Jets are just sitting there saying, well, we got Aaron Rodgers. Well, that doesn't work. They're going to have to fix the offensive line. They're going to have to come up with ways to protect themselves if they're going to win. Or else they're just going to get the shit kicked out of them. Now, they're going to win games because he's really good, but he's going to take a beating, and he's 40 years old.
Well, they got Rodgers and Hackett, who also is featured prominently in the first episode of Hard Knocks, that their relationship, how it goes back to Green Bay and all that stuff. I encourage you, Michael, to go check it out there. I don't want to give away all the spoilers. There's some funny moments in the episode and all that stuff, but it'll be interesting to kind of see this Hard Knocks series and how it affects the betting markets and also how it affects just the general consensus around this New York Jets team ahead of the season. Let's get into the blue chips, red chips, Michael. And before we give out the list and before we give out the guys who just made the cut, I want to kind of emphasize the interior defensive line, because this is the position, when you look at salaries, has started to sort of reflect what we've been saying in terms of the value of the position. We've talked about, value has been a big word about running backs and all that stuff, but in terms of the defensive tackles, only 2 positions have seen a salary increase higher than defensive tackle. That's right tackle and that's quarterback. Since since 2013, interior defensive linemen have seen an annual per year average 126.5% more than what the salaries is, what the increase has been. So the salary cap has gone up 76%. The defensive tackle salaries have gone up 126%. That just kind of shows you this position is no longer an afterthought, and it's now being valued within NFL teams.
Right. And I think when we talk about defensive tackles, it's hard to get sacks from tackle. Now, what Chris Jones did last year is remarkable, 15.5 sacks. What really matters is how many times are you hitting the quarterback, because the thing that's going to affect Aaron Rodgers from being great is if they get in the paint, if they get in that area between the center and the 2 guards in front of him. You can run people by you, but it's when you're just in the quarterback's face, that's a hard thing. Mm-hmm. And so this position has really impacted the passing game more than ever. If you said to me, would you rather have an inside rusher who can dominate inside or an outside rusher, I'm taking the inside guy, because I got to get in the paint. I got to make it hard for him to throw the football. And so that's why this position, the money has continued to go up, and guys have been playing. And like I've said on this podcast many times, it's hard to find great 3 techniques. It really is. Mm-hmm.
And that's why, when we think that there is a great 3 technique, they typically go in the top 10 of the NFL draft, because teams know how valuable those guys are. And it's funny because, we will all talk about the money 5 positions: quarterback, receiver, left tackle, corner, pass rusher, or edge rusher, or whatever. But it's defensive tackle, in my opinion, is one of those types of caliber positions, because every single quarterback will tell you, I hate pressure up the middle. Every single quarterback tells you that.
They can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Well, they can't step up. I mean, they can't step up. If you're going to beat Jared Goff, you got to get inside him. You got to get in you got to get in the paint. If you get in the paint on Goff, it's over. And it's going to be over. You get in the paint on any quarterback, it's going to be over. Brady hated it in front of him. Mm-hmm. It's just what it is. And so when you get a guy like the Giants, Dexter Lawrence, who was really good last year at doing that, that's why he got paid. That's why they're going to get paid.
Yeah, I think Brady would always say, like, hey, like those edge rusher guys, like I can take care of those guys by stepping up in the pocket. When you get it right up in his face, there's no getting rid of that. Like that's just like hard to throw the football when the guy's in your lap and sending your guard right into your face there. So we will get to the list on the other side. Blue chip, red chip, interior, defensive lineman. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. This is the GM Shuffle. We're going to take a quick break.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, let's jump right into this thing here. Blue chip, red chip, defensive tackles. Before we get into the red chips list, I wanted you to highlight the guys who just missed, guys who could be on the rise, and maybe some young players to watch. So in your opinion, who just missed the cut?
Well, I think DJ Reader is really a good player. And he just missed it. I thought he was, I put two guys in the red chips. I put Jonathan Allen and Hargrave. I kind of split them, so I have 11. Mm-hmm. Reader would have been the 12th player, but I thought he's a really good player for Cincinnati. Does a lot of good things. He can pressure from inside. I think Christian Barmore, the Patriots, is a really good nickel rusher. He's really good. He's got to stay healthy, but he can really create some problems with his quickness on the guards. I think the two young players to watch, the Eagles have both of them, are the Georgia defensive tackles, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. How are they going to play? I mean, that's key, because I don't think Fletcher Cox isn't the same player he once was. They're going to lose Hargrave. They've lost Hargrave. That's a lot of sacks and pressures inside. So Davis and Carter, both really talented players, both first-round picks. We're going to see. I'm anxious to watch them play this year. I really am.
Yeah, it makes me sick to my stomach that they got both of those guys there. I saw Jason Kelsey was talking about Jalen Carter earlier this week and was like, hey, like the guards are already kind of talking about how to block this guy and how to kind of game plan because he's been causing havoc, which, surprise, like he's a really good player. Yeah. And I don't know why some of those teams, I mean, I get why some of those teams passed on him, the character stuff, the off-the-field stuff, there was some concern there. But, man, at some point, it's like, dude, this guy's he's better than everyone else, man. You kind of take the risk. And the Eagles took the risk, and we'll see if they're rewarded with it coming up a little bit later on this season. All right. The red chip interior defensive lineman. You mentioned Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen were kind of like those two guys that you couldn't really decide between. Hargrave now with the 49ers adding to that really good defensive line. Jonathan Allen is on the really good defensive line for the Washington Commanders. He's the leader of that line. Christian Wilkins of the Miami Dolphins makes a return to this list. And then DeForest Buckner of the Indianapolis Colts, Derek Brown of the Panthers, and Cam Hayward, the ageless wonder, Cam Hayward there as the interior guy on the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line.
Still a really good player, Cam Hayward. I thought Derek Brown finally got in shape. I mean, Derek Brown finally really became a good player last year. You know, he was one of those guys that didn't understand conditioning, didn't understand that, how to play. Pad level got too high at times. But I thought he really, really kind of made a difference in what he was doing, and he continues to climb. They drafted him early, and he's a really good player. So for me, that was easy. Buckner's still a good player. He's long inside. He's got such length. It's hard to handle him. And the scheme fits him. So I really liked him. And Wilkins, to me, is just, he's a hard guy to block. He may not be the greatest pass rusher, but he pushes the pocket back. He's physical. I mean, he's going to get into that $22, $24 million range. He's a good player for them.
Yeah, he's one of their leaders, too, on that defense there. Buckner last year, though, you had as a blue chip. Now this year goes to a red chip. Was there just other guys kind of just surpassed him there, or was there anything that you saw that was put him a tick down?
I think Dexter Lawrence, he's going to be a blue chip. I mean, he jumped in there. Quentin Williams is a red chip. I mean, there's just guys, and I thought the whole defense for Indy didn't play as well. I mean, how about Matt Ryan's commentary about how it was? I mean, he didn't get deep into it, but God only knows the stories you could tell from that Indianapolis experience with Saturday in the Park. I mean, that could be a whole book one day, right?
We need a Netflix series on that one.
Yeah, that could be a Netflix series. That would be one to really watch, So that's kind of why I didn't put him. I didn't think they played as well. I think he had 7.5 sacks. He still had like 25 pressures, hits on the quarterback, but it still wasn't the level that it typically was. The one thing was like I wasn't sure Jeffrey Simmons or Cam Hayward in terms of, I was kind of going back and forth on that. I just think when Simmons is healthy, he's almost impossible to block.
Yeah, Cam Hayward, he is entering, I believe, his age 34 season. So to see him still on this list, he was a former first-round pick in the 2011 draft. Like it's a testament to him that he's still on this list.
He takes care of himself, right?
Yeah, he really does.
These guys got to be in shape. These guys are not, you can't be fat, drunk, and stupid and play this position. You got to be in shape. It's hard. You're getting doubled a lot. You got to work your way through it. It's not an easy position to play, and the conditioning, you got to be able to bring the heat every single snap. I think that's where Brown, you look at Buckner's body, you look at Allen, you look at Hargrave, those guys are well, they're lean, they're really well shaped, well conditioned.
Yeah, they're very put together. Yeah. Let's get to the blue chips list. This is the creme de la creme, and we'll get into these guys more extensively. But it starts off with Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs, coming off a season where he had 15.5 sacks, which is ridiculous from the interior. Aaron Donald, despite the Rams' woes, he is still on this list because he's one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Dexter Lawrence, who you mentioned of the New York Giants, Quinnen Williams of the New York Jets, and then Jeffrey Simmons returns to the blue chip list from the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, and I think really last year, if you're just objective, Chris Jones was the best defensive tackle in football. Yeah. I don't think there's anybody can debate that. I think Aaron Donald's great, and I'm not going to argue Aaron Donald, but Chris Jones was at a level that rarely is 15.5 sacks from the inside. All those quarterback pressures, hits on the quarterback. I don't know if we're going to see that. He was third in the league on hitting the quarterback. Bosa hit him 48 times, Crosby hit him 36, and Jones hit him 29 to go along with his 15.5 sacks. Oof. So I don't know. And then he has just for the good measure, 17 tackles for losses. So that was an elite season. There's just no way around it. And the kid, I think Brett Veach understands it too. Like the guy had a year unlike any other year. He's going to get paid.
Yeah, and Brett Veach, the general manager for the Kansas City Chiefs, said, quote, he deserves a big contract and team has, quote, no intentions of trading him. So Chris Jones, I believe he tweeted, like, I love you, KC, like a couple days ago. I don't know what that meant. Maybe just felt like tweeting something or whatever. But it's like they know how valuable he is.
Some of their best players in Kansas City, they've been able to take guys with character concerns and get him into their program because they have a program. See, that's the problem with Bieniemy. Bieniemy goes to Washington. He thinks it's like Andy Reid. Andy Reid has a program, right? And so they come in. They have there's a system of player procurement. He goes to Washington. It's just random. So they've been able to get. They take Tyreek Hill. They take Chris Jones. They take Frank Clark, who Seattle didn't want to deal. They've been able to take character guys. They took Tony in a trade, right? Yeah. They take some of these character guys that people want nothing to do with, and somehow, some way. Kelsey was even a character risk coming out of Cincinnati. And obviously it all proved to be wrong. Either they're doing better research than everybody, or they just understand how to get the most out of everybody.
Yeah, I think that it might be the latter. To where they're like, okay, this guy might be a little rough around the edges, but we believe that in our system, we have the leadership and we have the resources and the tools in place to get the best out of these guys because, people can be rehabilitated. We see that all the time. And also, I think we always lose sight of the fact that, these guys are, young guys in college, they're 20, 19 years old. Everybody does dumb shit at that age. I did dumb stuff at that age, where it's hey, I'm not proud of it, but I did it. But I think you grow as a person, and the Chiefs recognize that, and they have the leader in Andy Reid to help kind of facilitate that along.
I think they have a program, they have a leader. That's what you said is so true, right? And so they get him in, and they get him into the program, and either the player conforms or he doesn't, and usually they do, So, and they've been fortunate. They've been able to hit with picks. Like Chris Jones was great in college. He was great at there's no reason for him to be a high second-round pick. There really wasn't. It was the off the field. Tyreek Hill, was not a fifth rounder in terms of his talent. Anybody could watch him at Oklahoma State and say, wow, right? Now, did you think he was going to be a receiver? He was a running back, but then, he knew he could catch. Same thing with Kelsey, Kelsey, is not a tight end. I mean, he's a receiver. He just is a dominant receiver. I mean, and the fact that Kelsey is willing to take tight end money and not be the highest paid receiver in football is really in line with his character. It kind of is an unbelievable character thing because he could easily say, look, I want to be the highest paid receiver. I'm one of the best receivers in football. I'm not a tight end. I don't block no 7 technique.
And when you have that culture and you have that program, guys are more willing to do stuff like that. Like, it's like Kelsey clearly wants to be a part of it. He said, hey, I'm playing with one of my best buddies in Mahomes. I love it here in Kansas City. I love the fan base. I love what we've built here. And he wants to be a part of that. He wants to build something special versus if you don't have that program, guys say, you know what, F this, man. I'm going to go out there and get my money. Like I'm holding out until I get as much as possible. Like that's kind of what happens when you don't have that sort of a program. On the Chris Jones front, though, do you think that this thing gets resolved before the season starts? Does he get that big deal that he desires?
Well, I think he must be getting it because I think Veach wouldn't have come out and said what he said, right? I mean, Veach recognizes, just take the contrast between Veach's comments and Jerry Jones's comments, right?
Yeah.
Like either Zach Martin comes back in or, I don't know what's going to happen. But Chris Jones, I mean, I think he's over $500,000 in fines so far, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, every 2 days, $100,000 for these guys. Yeah. You go 9 days of camp, that's 18. That's 9 days. That's $450,000.
It's a lot of money, man.
Think about that, right? So just by the tenor of what Veach said, that he recognizes it, right? Whereas Jerry's saying, "Hey, I paid you already. I'm not paying you twice." That's what Jerry's saying. Jerry's saying, "Look, I paid you, Zach. I'm not redoing the deal. I paid you once. When your deal's up, I'll pay you again if you're good."
And Zach Martin's saying, hey, I'm the one that helps you block the Chris Joneses, the Derek Lawrences, the Quinnen Williams of the world.
Right, but when you have this every year you have to redo everybody's contract, it becomes problematic. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the Patriots redid Matt Judon. He got 15. Now, they didn't add any more years to it. So, they're going to have to pay Josh Uche if he has a good year this year, if he does. So those are good problems to have, but what are you going to do? You just can't redo everybody's deal based on the market. And then the hard part is to convince the players that their market value isn't what it is. Now, Chris Jones's market value is enormous.
Yeah. Can you imagine him on the open market? That'll be done in about 6 hours if that ever happened. It is interesting, though, because Chris Jones is in a really advantageous situation. I'm assuming he's your best of the best. Is that correct, Michael, for at least for this past season?
That's what I said. I mean, he's the number
best
one.
Of the best.
I think by far he was the one. I mean, he's the best of the best. There's no question in my mind. He was by far, and he was. Look, I think Aaron Donald is still great, but Chris Jones had a year last year that was hard to. I mean, he single-handedly in the last game of the year against the Raiders, he just destroyed the game. Just destroyed the game.
Hell of a player, and being the best of the best and coming off of that season, it's a nice time to do that when other 3 of the 5 guys in this list all got contracts in Lawrence, Quinnen Williams, and Jeffrey Simmons. So I guess if you're Chris Jones, you say, hey, it's my turn. I'm next. We'll see if they get that thing sorted out with the Kansas City Chiefs. Brett Veach seems to think that they do, as Chris Jones deserves, quote, a big contract. All right, we'll wrap things up on the other side, and we'll talk some preseason here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
The Jonathan Taylor saga continues, Michael Lombardi, with what's going on in Indianapolis. And the recent news out of Indy is that Jonathan Taylor has been excused, an excused absence to, quote, continue rehabbing on the ankle. So why would a team go ahead and let Taylor kind of rehab away from the facility when training camp's going on?
I mean, I told somebody that as soon as this Taylor thing came down that they need to send him packing. I mean, who wants to see his miserable face every day, right? So there's a thing called the law of threes, and I've talked about this before. There's 3 groups of people in every organization. There's the people in group 1 that'll do anything you want them to do. They're bought into Shane Steichen's program. There's people in group 2 that are not quite sure. They're going to test. They're seeing what's happening. Then there's people in group 3 who are unhappy, and they probably stay unhappy for most of the time. And as the leader of your team, if you try to win over people in group 3, everybody in group 2 moves into group 3. What you need to do is isolate group 3. Just ignore them. So, Jonathan, if you're not happy here, you go rehab on your own. I said this, show up between 6 and 9 here at the facility. We'll give you treatment. You go. You want to take your miserable attitude, it's not going to affect everybody else. We're not having you around the team. You're not going to poison the team. We're not going to cut you, but you're not going to poison the team. And that's the approach, and that's what they have to do. And I think it's the right thing to do. Look, the guy went from April 19th till he hires this new agent who's on Twitter, who's do you want this guy representing you?
He's on X
seriously.
now. Yeah.
I mean, X. Okay. So, you want him representing you? Do you understand what you're dealing with? Part of negotiation, part of persuasion is to understand the opponent. Who are you dealing with? Mm-hmm. Who are you dealing with? And this kid's personality, if you talk to anybody, his personality went from being a really good kid around the building to now nobody wants to be around him. So, ignore him. Ignore him. If he wants to be on PUP all year, good. That's fine. You're not bigger than the program. You're not bigger than the program. Nobody's bigger than the program.
Yeah. And I think this is the organization having to send that message to other guys that it's where, hey, this sort of behavior doesn't fly here. Because if you have him around the team, like you mentioned, you have those guys who are in group 3 or whatever that can influence group 2. It's oh, well, I guess that's how I have to act to get paid. You don't want this to become a norm where everybody, let's say, Michael Pittman has a great year, then all of a sudden next season is well, I want my contract, and it's oh, well, I saw Jonathan Taylor do this, so I'm going to do it now and look pissed off
right.
and have a hold in and do all this stuff. You don't want this to become the norm, so kind of send him away and say, hey, Taylor, get your ankle right, and when you get your ankle right, come back and we'll try to figure this thing out. Or if you want to hang out on PUP, because that's just going to be what
if you don't get your ankle right, that's fine too. We're just going to go on without you. I mean, they brought Kareem Hunt in. He didn't sign a contract. New Orleans thought they had him signed for a contract. I think the worldwide leader announced he was signing a contract there, but then he didn't. And so, but I mean, look, it is what it is. You're not going to change it. And the more you act angry and mad at the team that you're trying to get to pay you, I mean, how's that going to work out?
Probably not well. So Jonathan Taylor
of course not.
He's been excused. He's going to continue to rehab and all that stuff.
No, he's not been excused. He's been sent away. He's been like Napoleon. He went to Elba. They just put him away there. Just get him out of the. We don't. Why would I want to look at your miserable face every day when we're trying to build a program? If you're going to act so unhappy, if you're being treated so poorly, like you're at the Hanoi Hilton, then get out of here.
Well, I'll be following along with his agent on X to see what's the latest.
That guy, what a joke! I mean, that guy thinks he's smart. Seriously, give me a break. I mean, know what you're dealing with.
Is he new?
Look, Chris Jones's agent is not being stupid. Chris Jones knows he had 15.5 sacks. He's got all the leverage. He wants his money now. Okay.
Yeah, this agent, he's an interesting
I would have done a hold-in if I was Chris Jones's guy, but I would have tried to do something to not cure the fines.
Yeah, save yourself.
Zach Martin, and once I heard Jerry say what Jerry said, you got to know part of everything you do in life is know the opponent. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand who your opponent is, how are you going to win?
Well, you certainly won't have a strategy if you don't understand who the opponent is, and I think that's kind of where we're at with this Jonathan Taylor thing. All the best to you, buddy. Hopefully you get whatever you desire in this upcoming season. Before we get into tonight's preseason games, I did want to ask you this, the one thing that I noticed from the Manziel documentary. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to watch it. It's over on Netflix. It's one of their untold stories about Johnny Manziel. It's not too long. It's about a little over an hour or so. But the second half of the documentary I thought was really interesting because his agent, our buddy, Ari Gold, Eric Burkhart. I didn't know he was repping Johnny Manziel back in the day there. He also reps Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, and the whole gang. But he was talking about the lead up to the draft and how when Manziel had this private workout schedule with the Cleveland Browns, but the night before, he and his wide receivers were partying in the hotel room, drinking, doing all that sort. The morning of the workout, the receivers are just passed out, drunk, hungover, can't do the workout, can't even function. So Burkhart and I believe Manziel's lawyer end up running the routes for Johnny Manziel at this private workout. And for some reason, after all of that, Ray Farmer, who was the general manager for the Cleveland Browns at the time, still decides to draft Johnny Manziel. How are the alarm bells not firing off saying, hey, something's wrong here. We got to abort mission and take this guy either off our list or off our board, or we cannot do this in round 1, round 2, or round 3. To me, it feels weird that they still went ahead and drafted him after all that happened.
I think a lot of that came pressure from. I think the owner really wanted him. I think that was part of it too. The owner really wanted him, and they didn't even listen to. So when I was there, we hired this girl, Carly McCord, and Carly was she went to McNeese. She went to one of those, but she lived in Baton Rouge, and she knew all the players, right? Mm-hmm. She knew all the players. And when I was there, she was working in the scouting department. She was collecting information on all these kids, right? Because the one thing about her was she could, she had the ability to know everything. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, she passed away in a tragic plane accident right there. Her father-in-law was Steve Eminger,
the LSU coordinator.
Yeah. Right, the LSU coordinator, right? So anyway, she knew all the stuff about Johnny. She knew everything about Johnny. But when I left, they pushed her into television. They pushed her into radio. They didn't even use her. They refused to use her in the scouting department because they knew so much more than she did. Mm-hmm. And so that's what ended up happening. I mean, we had 2 drafts and we had 2 first-round picks that year. They drafted Justin Gilbert, the corner from Oklahoma State, and they drafted Johnny Manziel. I mean, think about that. I mean, there it is. And we did a lot of work, and we in New England, we ended up taking Garoppolo, who was probably they should have taken him, or Carr. And we did all that work. We were doing work on the quarterbacks there, going back to that summer. I mean, we were spending as much. We knew we needed a quarterback. I mean, even though some of the people in the building thought Brandon Weeden could be a player, but I think the owner really fell in love with Manziel, the fanfare, and all that. Yeah. But the character of the kid was bad at A&M. I mean, and she knew it. She knew it. She knew it.
Yeah, it's outlined in the documentary, all the stuff that was going on there at A&M. Cliff Kingsbury, he's prominently shown in the documentary and stuff. And Cliff's an interesting guy. I'll just leave it at that. But I don't think he comes off that great for somebody who's looking at this. I'm like, hey, is this guy supposed to be the leader of our organization? It's something that's interesting. But definitely, we encourage everyone to go ahead and check that out. It's over on Netflix. It's the Johnny Manziel documentary. I thought it was interesting just to kind of relive that time and the Manziel mania and all that happened once he won the Heisman Trophy.
We tend to believe what we want to believe in drafting. We tend to believe, okay, we'll fix. I mean, and look, we just had a segment where we talked about the Chiefs were able to, but part of the problem, Manziel had a problem. But part of the problem was that Cleveland didn't try to help the problem. They facilitated it more. There should have been more. Once you get the kid in the building, it's your responsibility. That's one thing I learned from Al Davis. Once you become a Raider, we got to fix the problems. You just next thing you know, he's got a Snickers commercial. He's bigger than life. Like they just kept mounting pressure, like they got their savior.
Yeah, that was the word I was about to use. That he was drafted to be the savior for Cleveland Browns football. Let's get into football, though. Tonight, 2 more games. First one, Texans at the Patriots. Looking at the show-sponsored DraftKings odds right now, the Texans have now moved to 4-point favorites against the Patriots. My indication is that doesn't look like Mac Jones is going to play in this game. You correct me if I'm wrong, but C.J. Stroud will start, and we'll get our first glimpse of the Texans' second overall pick. It was C.J. Stroud in this past draft here, but I'm excited to see Stroud and company.
Yeah, well, I think I wrote a column for VSiN yesterday about the preseason, and everybody says, preseason doesn't matter. There's, nothing you can learn. It's, bad football. Well, there's indicators in preseason, as I mentioned earlier in the pod. When stuff isn't going good, it ends up not going good. If it's not going good in preseason, it becomes a problem in the regular season, which I give many examples in the column. So I think you got to watch that. I think, tonight, I don't know if Mac's going to play or not. I would assume they probably will play Bailey Zappi and Mac. I mean, they got Trace McSorley. They only have 3 quarterbacks on their team. They got the Cunningham kid from Louisville, but he really doesn't play quarterback. He's kind of a jack of all trades. So, yeah, I mean, C.J. Stroud, this is the first time he's actually going to be in a huddle and call plays. Now, I'm told that Houston hasn't had a very physical practices down there. They've kind of been just going through they're kind of going through the program. So this will be interesting to see how they handle the contact and the physicality of the game. Look, you got to get your team ready to play, and it'll be fun to watch it.
I bet Houston on the money line in this game. Now, I bet this at a number that's not available anymore. I laid minus 130. They're now minus 170 on the money line. But I just kind of factored in. I was like, I figured that Stroud is probably going to play maybe a couple series, maybe 3 series, but it's not even about Stroud. It's the handicap. The handicap is about who's going to be playing quarterback in the second half. And I think for Houston, that person is going to be Case Keenum. Case Keenum played in the NFC title game about 6 years ago. I'm hoping he can handle a preseason game in the second half. So I'm backing Case Keenum and this Houston team there. And also, it does help that I think DeMeco Ryans is a first-year head coach. And typically we see those first-year head coaches try to establish that winning culture and like try to go for a win, especially early on in the preseason. So I'm hoping that can factor into it as well.
Well, we'll see how they do with the backup. I mean, the Patriots' backup defensive front's pretty good, so it's going to be interesting to see how that backup offensive line blocks him, because Case Keenum can be back there, but if he's getting the shit kicked out of him, it ain't going to help you too much, fam.
Well, let's hope we'll see. Let's hope he's not getting the shit kicked out of him for my purposes. I also bet the Vikings. I took plus 4.5. I still like it at plus 3.5. We're back in Jaron Hall against Seattle's Holton Ahlers, who I've never seen play quarterback, but hopefully he's not very good. That's what we got going on in the preseason tonight there. But 2 more preseason games. We'll be back on Monday to recap the entire weekend that was the National Football League. Preseason week 1 is here. Thank you to our producer, Elliot Bowman. Thank you to DraftKings. Thank you to VSiN. Thank you to you, Michael. We'll talk to you guys on Monday here on the GM Shuffle.